I want you to conjure up a mental image for a second. Just picture it. We are in the mid-1970s.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
It is a quiet, maybe somewhat dusty study in Sindh, Pakistan. The air is heavy, probably thick with tobacco smoke.
Right, because there is a man sitting in a rocking chair.
Exactly. Pipe in hand, just rhythmically moving back and forth.
It is the absolute classic scholarly tableau. Like, he is just completely detached from the real world.
He is. He has got a pen in one hand,
Yeah.
and he is surrounded by these massive stacks of antique reference books.
Just deep in the zone.
But here's the thing, he isn't just reading. He is basically fighting a war. Inside his head, he is reconstructing a conflict that tore a civilization apart 1,300 years ago.
Wow, okay. That's a really high-stakes way to view a historian at work.
Well, that is the vibe of the man we are unpacking today, Professor Syed Akhtar Raza Zaidi. We are doing a deep dive into his life.
And quite a life it was.
Truly. He was a poet, a refugee, a born genius, according to his family. And specifically, our mission today is to unpack his massive life's work, the book Mirror of History Biography of Imam Ali.
And I'm actually going to stop you right there for a second, because I know exactly what some of you listening might be thinking. You hear Biography of Imam Ali and you think, okay, so this is a religious text, like a devotional book.
Right. You expect hagiography. You expect miracles, just pages of glowing praise.
But that is exactly why this specific deep dive is so fascinating. We aren't looking at your standard religious biography here. We are looking at what happens when a historian who is trained in Western secular methodology,
Right.
I mean, a guy who's sitting there reading H.G. Wells and Will Durant, decides to point that highly rigorous analytical lens directly at 7th and 8th century Islamic history.
So he is essentially applying modern forensic historical methods to ancient faith.
Exactly. He is looking for what he called the unvarnished truth. And as we are going to see today, when you strip the varnish off centuries of tradition, well, you don't always like what you find underneath.
Yeah, that is going to be a heavy theme today. And for everyone listening, we have an incredible stack of sources to guide us through this. We have the book itself, specifically the English translation of Mirror of History by Dr. Tahir Bilgrami.
A huge undertaking in itself.
It really is. We also have the table of contents and the index, which is honestly a roadmap of early Islamic politics. And maybe most importantly, we have these deeply personal testimonials and letters.
From the family.
Right. From his children, Meher Uruj Javed and Adil, as well as his grandson, Sharik.
And I have to say, those letters are crucial for our deep dive today. They take us out of the dense history book and bring us right back into that study. That room his son Javed called the Gar-e-Hira, the cave of research.
Let's actually start there. Let's start with the man in the rocking chair, before he became this historian who was Professor Zaidi.
So his origin story begins in British India. He was born on May 21st, 1917, in a place called Memon Sadat. And the family descriptions of his early life are, they are intense. They straight up call him a born genius.
I mean, no pressure.
Right. But he actually backed it up.
Yeah.
He went to Lucknow University, which at the time was basically the Oxford of the East. It was this massive hub of poetry and debate and high culture.
Yeah.
He got his BA honors there.
Okay, so he is on this rising trajectory.
He is. But then the timeline just hits a massive wall. 1947.
The partition.
The partition of India and Pakistan. It is really impossible to overstate the trauma of this event for that entire generation. In 1948, Zaidi migrates to Pakistan. He has to leave behind his ancestral home, his library, his roots, everything.
He lands in a new country with essentially nothing. It is the classic refugee story.
Exactly. You lose your physical past, so you are forced to build a completely new future from scratch.
But looking at the sources, what stands out to me is that for Zaidi, losing his physical history seemed to make him absolutely obsessed with preserving intellectual history.
Oh, totally. Because despite the extreme chaos of migration, I mean, living in makeshift conditions and starting over, he joins the education department and he gets not one but 2 master's degrees from the University of Sindh.
Overachiever much.
Seriously. 1 degree in world history and 1 in Muslim history. And I want you to keep that in mind because that dual track is the key to everything he wrote later.
He wasn't just looking at his own culture in a vacuum.
Right. He was looking at it as a chapter in the broader human story.
Yeah. I noticed in the source notes that he wrote an academic book called Short History of Civilization. That sounds very H.G. Wells.
It definitely is. And he wrote another one called The Rise and Fall of Muslim Caliphate, or Khilafatka Uruj o Zawal, which sounds very Edward Gibbon. That book was actually part of the official syllabus at Karachi University. So we were talking about an academic heavyweight.
But there's a twist.
Yes. The curveball here is that he was also a poet.
The nohas. I saw that term come up a lot in the sources. For those of us who might not be familiar with the genre, what exactly is a noha?
You can think of it as an elegy. It is a poem of mourning, a rhythmic and often very tragic poem recited specifically to commemorate the martyrdom of Imam Hussein and his family. So it is history, but it is deeply emotional history.
So he has got these two contrasting sides. The cold, analytical academic historian and the deeply emotional poet.
Correct. His cousin Khurshid actually mentions in the letters that Zaidi wrote a whole book of these nohas while he was still just a student. And what is amazing is that 72 years later, those exact same poems are still being recited in India.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a legacy of the heart that is totally separate from his academic syllabi.
There is a couplet he wrote about the migration that really stuck with me. He wrote about searching for a quote-unquote corner of peace away from Hindustan.
Yeah.
It really feels like he was wrestling with that displacement right up until the end.
And I think that wrestling match happened physically inside his study. His son Javid describes him coming home after a long, exhausting day of teaching and retreating to that room, entering his Gar-e-Hira.
Okay, let's unpack that reference for the listener. Gar-e-Hira.
All right, so it translates to the cave of Hira. In Islamic tradition, that is the specific cave where the Prophet Muhammad received the very first revelations. It implies isolation. It implies spiritual struggle and carrying a heavy burden of truth.
So by calling his study that his son is making a big statement.
Huge. Javid is suggesting his father wasn't just in there casually reading books. He was trying to bring a sort of revelation of history down from the mountain to the masses.
Which perfectly brings us to the main event, the book itself. Mirror of history. I have been looking at the index provided in the sources, and honestly, calling it a biography feels like a bit of a misnomer.
It really does.
It looks like a military dossier mixed with a high-stakes political thriller.
The scope is just massive. And this is where we really need to dive into that concept of Western methodology we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, let's unpack that. When we say he applied Western historical methods to this book, what does that actually look like on the page for you as the reader?
Okay, so think about how traditional religious history is usually written. The phrasing is often something like, event X happened because God willed it, or person Y won the battle because they were uniquely righteous. It is
Right.
highly theological.
The good guys win because they're the good guys.
Exactly. But Zaidi flips that entirely. He is reading Will Durant's The Story of Civilization, right? So he is looking for material causality. He is looking at geography, economics, supply lines, tribal alliances.
Building the foundation.
Yes. When he writes about the early days of Islam and the Prophet's ancestors like Abdul-Muttalib and Abu Talib, he doesn't start with miracles. He starts with chapters on the environment and the inhabitants of Arabia. He sets the socioeconomic stage before a single main character even walks on.
It feels very grounded.
Grounded is exactly the word, and that leads directly into the military history aspect. You mentioned the index looks like a dossier.
Yeah, it lists all the major conflicts. The Battle of Badr Uhud Khandak, also known as Azab, Khaybar Hunain. But it is the subheadings that caught my eye. Things like the strategy of Naim bin Masood or the siege of Banu Nazir.
And that right there is the meticulous historian at work. He isn't just saying Ali fought bravely and won. He is breaking down the actual flanking maneuvers.
Give us an example.
Take the Battle of Khandak. That was famously a trench warfare situation.
Yeah.
Zaidi gets deep into the nitty-gritty of why the trench worked logistically, how it physically disrupted the cavalry charges of the opposing forces. He's treating these sacred holy wars as tactical military case studies.
Which is fascinating. But let's be real, that is probably the safer part of the book to write. The dangerous part, the part that must have kept him up at night in that rocking chair, is the politics.
Oh, absolutely. Because the moment the prophet dies, the history gets incredibly messy. And Zaidi dives right into the deep end of that mess. The index lists extensive chapters on the events at Saqifa Bani Saida.
Saqifa, that is a term that carries a massive amount of weight. Help us understand what that signifies.
You can think of it as a massive constitutional crisis. It was a meeting held immediately after the prophet's death, literally while his family was still preparing for the funeral, where a specific group of companions decided who would lead the community moving forward.
The ultimate room where it happened moment.
Precisely. And that one decision basically split the Muslim world forever.
And I want to be very clear for you listening, we are not taking sides here.
Yep.
We are strictly looking at how Professor Zaidi approached this heavily debated history in his book.
Right. And that is what is so unique. Usually when you read about Saqifa, You are reading a fierce defense of one side or a fierce attack on the other. It is hyper-polarized. But looking at the source notes, Zaidi tries to do something entirely different.
How so?
He covers the subsequent caliphates of Abu Bakr, Omar, and Othman not purely as religious eras, but as complex administrative regimes.
I actually saw a heading under Caliph Othman about capitalists and another about gifts and rewards. That sounded surprisingly modern.
Follow the money, right? That is a deeply modern analytical approach. He is analyzing the economic administration, how wealth distribution changed the society and eventually led to massive unrest.
He's treating them as politicians.
Yes. He is not treating the companions as infallible angels. He is treating them as political actors who are trying to manage a rapidly expanding empire.
And unfortunately, that unrest leads to the civil wars.
Yes.
The index lists the Battle of the Camel, or Jani Jamal, the Battle of Siffin, and the Battle of Narawan against the Khawarij dissenters. These are incredibly ugly conflicts where Muslims were killing Muslims.
And this is exactly where his Western methodology collides with his search for the unvarnished truth. His son, Iruj, makes a really critical point in the letters. He says the true freshness of the book comes from the fact that Zaidi bypassed later historians and went straight back to the primary sources of the 8th and 9th centuries.
Why does the specific century matter so much?
Because he is trying to bypass 1,000 years of accumulated myth-making. He wants to get to the eyewitness accounts. He wants to reconstruct history through the words of the men and women who were actually standing on the battlefield at Siffin, before the stories got polished and protected by later generations.
But isn't that incredibly risky? I mean, people love their myths. If you strip away the legend, you usually just make people angry.
You do. It is a huge risk. And his daughter, Merer, actually touches on this tension. She writes that her father was a believer of truthfulness. He illustrated the true facts. And this is the interesting part. She notes that few religious groups protested against it.
Really? That actually surprises me. I would have expected massive backlash.
Me too.
Yeah.
But I think it really speaks to his academic rigor. He wasn't writing angry polemics. He was presenting hard evidence. The source text explicitly mentions he didn't want to satisfy the fables created by hyperbolic admirers.
He wanted the historical figure.
Exactly. He wanted the historical Ali, not the mythological one. If he could prove it in the primary sources, he wrote it down.
There is a quote from his son Adil in the sources that I think frames this entire methodology perfectly. He says history is not just what really happened, but a complex intersection of truths, bias, and hopes.
It is such a beautiful and accurate line. Adil breaks it down further. He calls it remembered, recovered, and invented history.
Break that down for us. What is the difference?
So, remembered history is the oral tradition. It is what we tell each other at the dinner table. Invented history is the fable we create to make ourselves feel better or to justify our current politics. But recovered history, that is what you find when you dig deep into the dusty archives.
And Professor Zaidi's entire mission was to separate the invented from the recovered,
Exactly.
even if the invented version is much more comfortable for people.
Especially then. Adil notes that his father wasn't interested in, and this is his phrase, idiotic controversies. He was interested in understanding the deep societal beliefs that drove people to kill each other in the 7th century.
Okay, so we have seen the warrior and we've seen the politician, but the book is called Mirror of History. What is actually being reflected? Is there a complex human being in there beyond the battlefields?
There is, and this is where Zaidi the intellectual really shines through. Because he argues that Ali's legacy isn't just about swinging a sword or managing a treasury. The index lists entire chapters on the knowledge of fiqh, ilm-i-kalam, and tasawwuf.
Okay, those are some big academic terms. Let's define those quickly for the listener.
Sure. So fiqh is jurisprudence. It is the law, how do we run a fair and just society. Ilm-i-kalam is scholastic philosophy or theology. How do we use logic and debate to understand the divine? And tasawwuf refers to Sufism or mysticism, the spiritual inner dimension of the faith.
So Zaidi is painting Ali as a sort of philosopher king.
Exactly. It is a highly intellectual portrait.
I also notice a section listed as administrative orders and specifically instructions to someone named Malik-e-Ashtar.
Yes, that is a very famous document. It is Ali's letter to Malik Ashtar when he appointed him as the governor of Egypt. It is essentially a masterclass in governance. It lays out the strict rights of the poor, the heavy duties of the ruler, and warns against the extreme dangers of corruption.
So Zaidi wanted to ensure that this intellectual and administrative lineage was preserved just as meticulously as the battle maps.
He did. He covers Ali's status in literature too, specifically the beauty of his expression in the Najul Balagha. But of course, like The history he was writing his own story has a very tragic cutoff.
He died quite young.
He did, just 64 years old. And the real tragedy for history lovers is that this was supposed to be a massive 2-volume project.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the source notes mention that the second volume was not published during his lifetime. He died with the work unfinished. The book covers the tragic elements, the assassination by Abd Allah ibn Muljim, the final will, and the interment, but his own life ended before he could see the full project realized.
That is heartbreaking. You have this vivid image of him in the rocking chair just racing against time.
His son Javed actually says he wanted to accomplish his works before saying goodbye to this dar-e-fani, which means this fleeting world. He absolutely knew the clock was ticking.
And I think this is the uplifting part of our deep dive today. The work definitely did not die with him.
No, it didn't. And this is where we have to look at the incredible legacy he left in his children.
Reading the letters from the family, you can just feel how full of pride they are.
They really are. You have Adil, the youngest son, who everyone in the family credits with, doing the real heavy lifting to get these works reprinted and translated into English. He basically picked up the torch to keep the legacy alive.
And then there is the grandson, Sharik. Now, he never actually met Professor Zaidi, right?
No, Zaidi passed away when Sharik was just an infant. But Sharik's letter is so fascinating because he identifies his grandfather's legacy not just in the published books, but in the actual lived values of the family.
Right. He talks about the education of his aunts.
That is such a huge detail. We are talking about Pakistan in the 1950s and 60s. Educating daughters to a high academic level simply wasn't the norm. It wasn't the priority for a lot of people. But Zaidi ensured that his 3 daughters received higher education.
He practiced what he preached.
Exactly. Sharik sees that as a direct result of his grandfather's deeply held worldview, the idea that the truth shall set us free.
So it isn't just an empty slogan for him, it is a daily practice.
Right. Whether it is uncovering the unvarnished truth about a civil war in 67 AD, or recognizing the truth about the immense value of women's education, it all stems from the exact same core integrity.
It is truly amazing how a man sitting in a rocking chair in a small dusty town in Sindh can create a ripple effect that crosses generations and continents. All the children are living in the U.S. now, but they are still completely anchored by this monumental work produced in that tiny study.
It connects right back to that cave of research idea we started with. He wasn't writing this for money. The family sources are crystal clear on that point. He wasn't writing for fame or for hyperbolic admirers. He was writing to leave a true map for the next generation.
So let's bring this all together for everyone listening. What is the ultimate takeaway here? Why should you care about a biography of Imam Ali written half a century ago by a professor in Pakistan?
I think it is really about the intense discipline required to seek the truth. We live in an era of total information overload, right?
Definitely. Hot takes everywhere.
Hot takes, conflicting narratives, echo chambers. Professor Zaidi shows us exactly what it takes to cut through all of that noise.
And it takes work.
It takes immense work. It takes going all the way back to the primary sources. It takes actively ignoring the comfortable fables we tell ourselves and looking hard at the economic and political realities. It is a timeless lesson in media literacy, really.
And courage. I mean, it takes genuine courage to stand up to your own community and say, hey, actually, it didn't happen quite the way you think it did.
Absolutely. The courage to be objective.
I want to leave you with a thought from his son Adil's letter that I just can't get out of my head. He suggests that history is often just a tool, a weapon we use to win arguments in the present. We invent a past to justify exactly who we want to be today.
Weaponized memory.
Exactly. Weaponized memory. So here's the challenge for you to mull over. How much of what you accept as history, whether it is about your country, your religion, or even your own family, is actually just a story someone invented to get your vote or your allegiance today?
That is heavy.
And do you have the bravery, like Professor Zaidi in his rocking chair, to go digging for the unvarnished truth, even if what you find hurts?
That is the big question worth asking.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you next time.